much needs fixing around the globe.
Do you draw the line
and next door?
You and I, all that's broken from the river.
It is time for We Act Radio's Conversations Toward Repair. Welcome. This is We Act Radio, broadcasting from historic Anacostia, Washington, D.C., from our virtual studios, which are around the city. We are broadcasting on the Coach Tank land, which I've been telling people during the series was completely taken over by Europeans within about 40 years of the first arrivals of Europeans on this land. And the properties are now undergoing another set of displacements as luxury developments and higher end commercial properties are coming into an area that was for many, many years predominantly African American and also lower income. I'm Virginia Avniel Spatz, and this is a special report of Conversations Toward Repair. The overall intention of the series is to focus on undoing violence by exploring different kinds of violence that we don't always recognize in our city, in our nation, in our globe, and by highlighting ways of building peace. For this morning's, or this afternoon, I guess, episode, we're taking a little bit of a different angle, and my guest this morning is Elissa Silverman, who is currently serving as at-large member, an independent on the DC Council, and running for re-election here in DC, where things have taken some odd turns in the last couple weeks. So I'm going to bring Councilmember Silverman into our virtual stream here. And say, just very briefly say welcome and thank you so much for joining the show.
Oh, great to be here, Virginia.
Terrific. I'm so glad that on short notice we were able to put this together. I will tell listeners of the show that we did have something else planned. I have been doing this series on undoing violence in different kinds of ways, and for logistical reasons, the episode planned for today has to be set aside until later. But this is a perfect topic to discuss because there are many kinds of embedded violence in our city that don't always appear in a really clear way, but are in our election seasons. And before we jump into the current season, I do want to just acknowledge, I mentioned it last week, but I want to acknowledge that November 2nd is the anniversary of a massacre on Election Day in 1920 in Florida. And it's not something that we learned that much about. And I'll share some links. I usually put links in the We Act Radio blog post so that people can learn more about whatever issues come up. But I mentioned it last week in my conversation with Dr. Natalie Hopkinson that we do have to keep in mind that our elections are very precarious and that there's a lot, people have been through a lot to make our elections happen the way they do. And words have consequences. So with that, I want to say I just gave the briefest introduction. Would you like to say more about your how many years you've been on the council and just some basic things for people who might not know?
Sure. Well, great to join We Act Radio. So to all the listeners out there, I'm Elissa Silverman. It's been my honor to represent you on the DC Council as one of the two independent at-large members. I've chaired the Labor Committee for 6 years, and I think a lot of residents probably know me two ways. They know me in the past few years, especially residents who work in the hospitality industry and in other in-person jobs, because when COVID hit, they likely were laid off, and a lot of residents needed help with their unemployment benefits and rental assistance. And I spent a lot of time helping residents make sure that safety net was in place. I'd say the other big program that I'm known for is paid family leave. This is the program that the city put in place of actually July 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, on time and under budget. That allows you, when you have a significant either health event in your life or a joyous event, like welcoming a new child into your family, or a really tragic one, like having to say goodbye to a close family member, that you are able to take time off to take care of that either health need or family issue, and receive income and compensation, so that it doesn't end up being a tragedy, financial tragedy as well. I hope that's a sufficient introduction for you, Virginia. And I'm running for reelection.
I, I,
So
I
I'm on
think,
the ballot.
I think that will help those who maybe don't follow all the time, all the votes. There's so much going on with the council. It can be a whole, well, obviously, it can be a whole job just to even follow what is going on in terms of legislation, our budget, all of that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I think that'll give people a basic idea. And I will tell listeners that I asked Elissa to join because some things have been happening in the last couple of weeks that have sort of taken the election season into a direction. I won't say unpredictable direction, but something that some things have been going on that are generating a lot of talk in the city, and not necessarily in ways that are clear to people. So the two things that I would like to discuss, and you can add to the list if you have time, are the recent ruling by the Office of Campaign Financing about the expenditure back in the primary, about surveying Ward 3 voters. And a related issue is the appearance of a new independent expenditure committee called Opportunity DC, which has been sending out mailers with kind of apples to oranges comparisons of your votes, and also a sitting council member, Kenyon McDuffie, who is now a Democrat in Ward 5, but running independent at large. And there's some comparisons that aren't, like I said, they're kind of apples to oranges. And people were surprised because October 11th, a brand new independent committee shows up and starts putting money into the campaign. And I thought that would be something that we should maybe discuss a little bit too. And as I said,
Sure.
please feel free to add another topic if you like.
Well, the two are related, actually, Virginia. It might not seem obvious. I mentioned that I have been a champion of paid family leave and making sure workers get their benefits. I think another big thing that's been in the news lately is the DC Housing Authority, and how I've also been, advocating as loudly as possible that we need to completely overhaul the authority, because it's not providing safe and sanitary housing for many of our residents. So where am I going with this? Well, championing all those things, whether it be safe housing and making sure we aren't giving away valuable housing authority property, or advocating for our public schools, and making sure that workers have their benefits, has made me the target of a lot of big money special interests. And to your first question, in Ward 3, I'm a citywide candidate, and which means that I get support from all over the city, including in Ward 3. As many people remember, there was a contentious primary race because of a surprise that occurred when Councilmember Che decided to retire. I have to say that, I was following what was going on. I knew several candidates in the race. And I think, like many voters, I felt like many voters, there were candidates with similar positions. There are several candidates who came to me who shared what I would say are my values, and they wanted my support. And I wasn't sure what to do. I think I felt like a lot of voters do, like, okay, what's the difference here? And then the Washington Post wrote a story that made me see the big difference, that this big money group called Democrats for Education Reform, which sounds like really innocuous, but they're an out-of-state group that has an agenda of promoting charter schools. And I would say, that's not terrible, but it really impacts our traditional public schools, as a lot of people, and they spend a lot of money. And 2 years ago, they had political mailers that I thought were deceptive and deceiving to DC voters, and I criticized them for it and got into a big tangle with them. And that tangle continues. So when I saw they were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I have to tell you, Virginia, the last filing of how much money independent groups have spent was filed on, I can't remember what day it is. I think it's Wednesday. I think it was filed Monday, Halloween. And this group, DFER, has spent $1.5 million on trying to elect basically their candidates, a few candidates for office, to promote their agenda. And I object to that. So to get back to the Ward 3 race, there were several candidates who had approached me for an endorsement, and they were pretty similar. And I wasn't sure who had more support, and it was important to me to make the right choice. So I decided to do what I do, go to the data. And so I commissioned 2 polls. I did 2 polls because I saw it as an opportunity for me to kind of test out some polling, a new polling methodology as well. And I spent $6,000 on 2 polls. The polls came back, and it was clear that one candidate who shared my values had the strongest campaign. And I told the other candidates that I couldn't support them because I was going to support the person I thought had a chance to win. And in the end, that person won. And I think something happened in that race that has not happened before in district politics. And that was that 3 people decided that the benefit to the ward was bigger than their own personal ambitions. They were upset about the big money that you just put on that scroll. They didn't want Ward 3's race to be bought. And so they decided on their own to come out of the race. Now, we all supported the same candidate, but the candidate who lost, and I think the people who support this big money group have just continued to make an issue of this. And I have to say, I would, I got endorsed by Marion Barry in the 2014 election, and I kind of feel like using what I would call a Barryism, that they just need to get over it. They lost. They're trying to allege all kinds of scurrilous claims that I push people out, and which is insulting, frankly, to the 3 people who made these very difficult decisions. I mean, I've run 4 times. And as you know, Virginia, and many people know who've been involved in local politics, your friends, your family get involved. It's not easy to tell your husband, your kids, your supporters who've spent many hours with you that you are deciding to withdraw from a hard-fought campaign. But that's what these 3 folks did. And, the people who lost just don't want to give up. Okay, your second question about Opportunity DC. So again, I'm a target. I will say that the latest campaign finance filing shows DFER is spending to try to defeat me. And this other group, as you mentioned, Opportunity DC, is spending as well. And this is a group of big business people, mostly developers, and again, education, pro-charter education folks. And as Virginia said, and I might have the flyer here, actually, I have a flyer from the last election, because I keep them, that shows the paid for line. So what you want to look for when you're looking at campaign materials is the paid for line. For example, I'm sorry, I'm fumbling because I did not prepare to do this. Let me see here. I got a big stack of campaigns because I keep them, honestly. So here's a piece of, oh, that's Matt's. Thought I had a piece of my own campaign mail. Yeah. Actually, I'll just show an example of my own mail that I have in front of me here. So this is a piece of my campaign mail. And on campaign mail, there's always a paid for that shows who paid for it. And let me, so for example, this is a piece of what we call an independent expenditure. This is an independent expenditure for me. And down here, it shows who paid for the ad. This one, I'm an ally of Labor, and Labor is endorsing me. And here, this shows the top 5 contributors to this piece of political mail.
For those who we couldn't see it, do you want to see it?
So this is my mail,
and of course we have people who are just listening. So
sure. Well, so what I would say to listeners is, you always want to look in the piece of mail you get who pays for it. And so there are attack ads that are being funded by this group, Opportunity DC, and it says that who the top 5 contributors are to Opportunity DC. And off the top of my head, one of them is Catherine Bradley, who is a very wealthy person who's an ally of this group DFER. Another is this guy, Bob Murphy. Bob Murphy is the head of MRP Development. MRP Development is a big real estate developer in this city. And in fact, the reason why Bob doesn't like me is because his company won the contract, or I would say was handed the contract, to redevelop the DC Housing Authority's own headquarters. And so Housing Authority residents probably know it because they've gone there angrily to say the conditions of their homes. And others might know it if you know where the new NPR headquarters is located, or you went to Gonzaga High School, or you live in Sursum Corda at one point in your life. It's right there on North Capitol Street, within view of the Capitol, right between the NOMA and Union Station metros. So prime real estate. I live near it too, because I live in Northeast Capitol Hill. And they got this piece of property that they're going to develop with a lot of, luxury for-profit housing. And they're hardly going to develop any housing for actual housing authority residents. I think that's a scandal. But Bob Murphy thinks that's a good deal for him. So certainly he wants to keep that deal in place. And so he's one of the top 5 funders. Another funder is Josh Bernstein, a Bernstein company. Some of you all might live in a Bernstein property. They are one of the biggest real estate landlords in the city. So I guess the big takeaway here, Virginia, is, I've been fighting for working families at the council, and that puts me at odds with a lot of the big money special interests, especially real estate interests, and especially sort of the people who are not supportive of our traditional public schools. And, they're spending a lot of money to try to defeat me. But I guess what I always tell my supporters, Virginia, is I have you, and that is a lot more valuable than $211,000 that Opportunity DC has. The final thing I say, I know I've been talking a long time, is that, I believe in district voters, Virginia. I really do. I believe just because every election, the nonsense, as I call it, has gotten higher. But every time I get elected, and it's because I think district voters can separate fact from fiction. They know who's fighting for them and who's just around at election time, and just seeing the right things at election time. So, there's a lot of money in this race. I'm actually going to be sending an email to my supporters detailing some of the things you said. $2.1 million. Actually, it's 2.2, because my little labor group, it's not some of our biggest labor groups that represent a lot of our workers in the city are behind me. They're spending $100,000. Everyone else is spending like 2.1 million. And, everyone else is these outside big special interest groups who, want their way at the Wilson building. And, it's not easy, Virginia. I will admit it's gotten ugly. But I guess when I think big picture about it, I'm okay with these people trying to oppose me. Because I think, I'm fighting for people who don't have a lobbyist at the Wilson building. I'll give you one more story. Early voting, voting has changed in our city. Hopefully everyone has their ballot. And if somehow you don't, or you're recently moved to the city, you can, of course, vote in person now. The polls are open in person. And they will be from now till over the weekend. And then they'll be in-person voting on Tuesday, the 8th. That's the last day you can vote. Last day you can put your ballot in the mail. Last day you can put it in the drop box. So I was at Turkey Thicket the first day of in-person voting, which was Monday. And a woman came out of the rec center, and she was like, "Oh, Councilmember Silverman, I just voted for you." She was so excited, and and she said, "Do you know why?" And I said, "No," but thanks. And she said, "Because I'm a school bus driver, and when COVID hit, I lost my job." And she told me, "I'm a diabetic. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was so frightened. And, I called your office, and your office helped me get my unemployment benefits, and you helped me with rental assistance." And she told me, "I'll never forget that. Like, that was one of the scariest moments of my life. And like, I didn't think anyone would be there to help me." And I got to give credit to my constituent services team, Pat Joseph and Sharnisa Royster, who have just done incredible work with our residents who needed to file for unemployment. But, I gave her a big hug, and I told her, that's why I do this work. That's why I'm in it, because that's exactly what unemployment is designed for. You lose a job through no fault of your own. That's the position that 200,000 district workers were in. And the government is supposed to be there to help you, to weather the storm, and to get back on your feet. And that, no matter what nonsense is being said about me, I told her, you remember me and I'll remember you. And I have. I've told this story many times since Monday.
Well, I did want to pick up on a couple of things that you said. One of them is that DC voters are smart, or they can find things out.
They are.
But I do want to point out that this mailing that came out that was sponsored by the Opportunity DC IEC, it says, to go to this point that you were just talking about, that McDuffie secured $100 million in emergency pandemic relief funding to help DC employers and small businesses keep jobs here. Well, you and Councilmember McDuffie share votes on that. And it is true that Councilmember McDuffie authored the NEAR Act, but you voted for it. I mean, and then what they have in the other column is that you did something to increase red tape for businesses. So as I mentioned at the start, this apples to oranges. It's not like you voted against emergency relief, as your story illustrates. So do you want to say anything about those? I mean, of course, once I know you have to get back to the council. Once you're off air, I can explain to people how to look up a vote. But do you want to, say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, these are they try to muddy the waters here, but in terms of my support for small businesses, it's been strong. I mean, I'm labor chair, but a significant thing about that $100 million, Virginia, is 30 million of it came from the labor committee. In that during the budget 2 cycles ago, there was extra money actually in the paid family leave fund. And I have to tell you that a lot of the hospitality industry fought paid leave. They didn't want to give paid leave to their workers. And some of my allies said, why are you going to give extra money from the paid leave fund to the hospitality industry? They fought you on paid leave. And I said, because it's the right thing to do. I want to make sure, and I negotiated with the hotel industry that this money needs to go to keeping workers on the payroll. And that's exactly what happened. And so it's a little disappointing that they are not, at least not remain neutral, because you got to do the right thing. So that's just ridiculous. And I have many small business supporters. In terms of public safety, that was a resolution, I think, from 5 years ago. If you look at the flyer, 2017, I mean, my position on public safety is that we need to have a strategy. We need to make sure that, we have a police force that follows the law, that doesn't target, especially Black residents, and is well-trained. But we need to have a police force that, is adequate to police our city. And provide and make people feel safe. It's not about policing. It's about people being safe in their neighborhoods. So that's ridiculous. And then I can't remember what the third thing was.
Let me see. It's
I increased red tape.
corruption.
This is about the OCF claim. Yeah. So so we talked about this already. But they're just trying to take advantage of, what ended up being, I think, a political stunt to begin with. So let's talk about that. As I said, I supported a candidate. There are other people who decided to coalesce behind that candidate because we wanted to fight the big money, and the big money lost in that race. And then one of the candidates running against me, I think to get attention, filed a complaint with these, what I would call spurious complaints, saying that there was all kinds of coordination. I muscled people out of the race. It's just not true. The candidates who left the race, I mean, actually, one of the people I don't even know. The other 2 candidates did come to me for endorsements, but, I told them I couldn't endorse them because I didn't think they had a chance to win. And so one of my opponents filed a complaint. That's what they're writing about. But I'll tell you that, so what happened this past week is that the Office of Campaign Finance dismissed his complaints, said there was no evidence of coordination. Here's what's at issue. They did say that, well, you spent $6,000 on 2 polls for Ward 3, and you didn't run in that race, so we don't think you can spend fair elections money, the public financing money, for a election in which you are not a candidate. And I just have to disagree. I disagree. I think the law is on my side. And what is the law, Virginia? The law says that an allowable expenditure is something that directly or indirectly aids your election. I would say that making a good endorsement in Ward 3, which is where I do have a significant number of supporters, is really important to me and to my election. I'd say, secondly, defeating big money, which is always against me, is important to my election. And finally, as I said, I did some polling. I did 2 polls, not just one, because I wanted to see if this very inexpensive polling method might be worthwhile. And it was kind of low stakes for me in that it wasn't my own. I wanted to use it before my own election. And I can say that you get what you pay for a little bit with cheap polling. So I decided not to use it in the general. But that's, so that's the issue at hand. So OCF last week said, well, you can't spend this money in this way, and we want you to pay it back. And I said, look, I think your ruling is wrong, and I'm going to appeal it. But, there's interesting timing here. Like less than 2 weeks before Election Day, they come out with a ruling that I think has some very questionable legal there's no legal underpinning to it. They just said, oh, we don't think that you're not a candidate in that race, so you can't spend the money. And as my lawyers, we are appealing. I was just reviewing our appeal. And as my lawyers point out, well, if OCF becomes the decider of what's a proper political tactic or not, it's like saying, well, we paid for pizza from Wise Guys Pizza, and is that a proper expenditure? Because maybe my volunteers just were hungry and wanted to eat dinner. And are we really just providing them dinner, or is this really furthering my electoral chances? Like I didn't buy a car. I didn't go to Tahiti. I paid for 2 polls, and this is a campaign. These are electoral polls. So I think this is much ado about nothing. I am appealing it, and unfortunately, we have heard from OCF that actually this goes to the Board of Elections. There's an active election going on. They're running polling sites right now, so they're not going to be able to have a hearing until past Election Day. So what I ask voters to do is look at this case. I mean, if you don't think a candidate, a citywide candidate, should be able to poll a ward race to see what voters are thinking, then okay, you will disagree with me. I think it's reasonable and campaigning, frankly. And then I'd ask you to look at my record. I'd ask you to look at not just paid family leave and my work on unemployment, my work trying to make sure that we have a transparent government. And let me point that out too, Virginia. Like, nothing was hidden here. I mean, it's what's kind of crazy is we're reviewing something that happened 5 months ago that was completely out in the open. These polls, in fact, a lot of people in Ward 3 knew I was polling because at the end of the poll, it said paid for by Elissa for DC. So we didn't hide that we were doing the polling. The polling was reported on my June 10th campaign finance report. And, when the press asked me questions about it, I said, look, I read the law carefully and I'm staying within the law. So, I did the polling to make sure I made a good endorsement and a strategic endorsement. I told the candidates, I can't share the poll with you. That's not allowed. And actually I had several council member, or at least one council member, say to me like, hey, can I get the poll? And I said, no, the poll is for me. I paid for it, and I'm keeping it to myself and my campaign team.
Well, I know our time is running out, but I did want to ask, I know there were issues also with Councilmember McDuffie, who ran in a different race in the primary, and then there were questions about could he use campaign financing again, and he switched parties, and there were questions about that, and there is, I could go on, but do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. I mean, Councilmember McDuffie initially wanted to run for Attorney General, and the Board of Elections ruled that he was ineligible because he didn't meet the requirements that are specified in law. At that point, Councilmember McDuffie called me twice because there was an effort by him and his campaign supporters to try to make a change, an emergency change in the law to keep him on the ballot. I disagreed with that. Now, does the law, should we revisit it and clarify it? Yes. But I didn't want to put my thumb on the scale for a colleague when the board ruled that he was ineligible. So I told Councilmember McDuffie, I can't support emergency legislation to keep you on the ballot. I was told by some of his supporters, it's in your best interest to support that emergency, because if he doesn't run in the AG race, he might run in your race. And I said, so be it. And it happened. But the Office of Campaign Finance said, you got this public financing money for your AG race. The law says you can't use that if you run for another office in the same cycle. So he had to go what we call the traditional route, which many district residents remember well, has a much higher campaign contribution limit. So in my race, it's $100, and then district residents get matched 5-1. He has $1,000 limit. What's significant there, and it's his choice, in my opinion, is he decided to get a lot of money from the city's real estate developers. In his first filing, more than 80% of the money was from the real estate industry, and mostly in $1,000 increments. I don't think it's changed much. I haven't scrutinized his other filings. I think he's had 3 filings, but a significant amount of money comes from those big money special interests in our city we talked about earlier. And people say, well, that's because he couldn't run as a fair elections candidate. I think it's a choice. Before fair elections came, this is my first time running with public financing. In prior years, I always ran without corporate money. I only took money from individuals. And actually, we did an analysis, and our average contribution was something like $100. So actually, fair elections I've been running under fair elections the same, the whole time, basically without the match. That's a choice that candidates make in terms of what are the rules of the game that they're going to impose on themselves. And, Councilmember McDuffie, look, he's been my colleague. I don't have anything personally against him. But I do have an issue with his taking all this money from, special interests, particularly ones that I know don't help working people in our city. If we're talking about displacement, the people that Councilmember McDuffie talks a lot about preventing displacement of Black residents, but the same people he's collecting money from are the same forces that have really been, involved with pushing Black residents out. And I can be criticized for saying that, but it is what it is. And it's sort of, I think this election is a little bit of a whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the big money special interests, or are you on the side of working families? So I thank you, Virginia, for the opportunity. And I just would say to all district residents, check the records. I know it's sometimes hard to do that. I have a website, elissafordc.com. If you send me an email, I'll try to answer it. It's a crazy time, but people do, and I respond to them. I'm always amazed at district residents who are just like, what's your position on this? And they just reach out. And we will have events over the weekend too. So I really thank you. And, Virginia, like voting, I'm amazed that I'm in this position. I never thought I'd be a politician, but voting has always been like one thing my parents taught me was the importance of voting. And election day was a big deal in my family. I remember my mom always worked for our local state legislator, always worked the polls for her. And as a kid, I would go and vote with my parents. And it was exciting, mail-in voting's different. But I will say the first election I ever voted in myself, I was at college and had to absentee vote. And I still remember like doing my research at the college library and filling out my ballot. It was for Bill Clinton in the Maryland primary. And, I remember election night when he won. And it sounds silly, but I just felt like I cast that vote, that helped him win. And, I know there are many district residents who don't think their voice matters, but it does. I would just say to residents, don't be discouraged. It's those big money special interests that are trying to discourage you and think your voice doesn't matter, but it really does. And I think my elections have proven that because we've fought that money. And I think the Ward 3 race proves that. And that's why they're so upset about it. Because like when people get together and, come for a common cause, you can beat them. And I think that's what's so upsetting to them in Ward 3. And, and I hope we'll beat them on November 8th as well.
All right. Well, thank you. I know I kept you over the allotted time, but
That's okay.
thank you so much for coming in and talking to voters and to other listeners around the country who are just interested in what's going on here. So I am going to take the last minutes of our broadcast to actually give people some links so they can look up the various.
Well, thanks, Virginia.
And I'll let you get back to the council. So thank you so much. All right. So this continues to be We Act Radio, broadcasting from historic Anacostia, Washington, D.C., from our virtual studios around town. You were just listening to Elissa Silverman, who is currently independent council member at large on the DC Council and running for re-election. During our conversation, we talked about a number of things that have to do with voting records. And I want people who are listening to know that the DC Council does have a legislative database that is, I won't say it's the easiest thing to navigate, but you can look up an individual council member's voting record. You can look up the voting record on any piece of legislation that was voted on by the council or by a committee. And you can also look up legislation that was introduced and didn't move forward. So I have mentioned at several points on We Act Radio's various channels that there is a website that is called Safe and Free DC. And that has a number of very specific bits of legislation that were basically proposed by a coalition of organizations from DC, including Harriet's Wildest Dreams, the DC Justice Center, and another group that is focused on the rights of returning citizens. And there are links on weactradio.com that show you that set of legislation and whether the items have been introduced, what committee they're in, and whether there has been a hearing. So that's another thing you can also look up. It's public record and it's pretty easy to find on the DC Council website. So I will put that link for you as well. And I'm going to put on our website this piece of this mailing that came out. They had the three supposed comparisons that we were just discussing. And while We Act Radio, I think I perhaps should have said at the top, We Act Radio has endorsed Elissa Silverman and Kenyon McDuffie and has been providing a variety of forums for people to learn about all of the candidates, but has in fact made a statement of support for both McDuffie and Silverman. And this piece of literature that came out in the mail to many of us from the Opportunity DC Independent Expenditure Committee is doing a comparison that I think if you really look at the different votes that are being discussed, they are not a piece of legislation that McDuffie voted yes and Silverman no, or vice versa. They actually, as I said, while Elissa Silverman was still with us, their voting records are actually very similar on a number of these issues. And the piece of mailing is deceptive in the way that it presents these things. So I, just as a person who would like people to make informed choices, hope that you will actually look up what is said about any candidate, and even check the candidate. Usually they're going to be sharing their own voting record correctly, but there are ways that they might downplay something that isn't popular now, and you want to look at the whole record, and the whole record is there on dccouncil.gov. It used to be dccouncil.us, and the website that will still get you there, but it is now dccouncil.gov. And in the few minutes that we have left, I did want to again mention that we've been talking about an independent expenditure committee that is endorsed McDuffie on October 11th, which is very late in the season. And I did ask Opportunity DC if they had any comment they wanted to make about why they made such a late decision. And I did not hear back from them, so I can't share that information. If they choose to respond, I will share whatever it is that they bring to us. And Opportunity DC is, as I said, it's an independent expenditure committee, and Councilmember Silverman explained some of the donors to it. The two people who organize it are Natwar Gandhi, who was the independent chief financial officer for the district for 13 years. It's at least 10 years ago now, but he was a longtime presence in city government. And Antoine Ford, who is president and chief executive officer of Enlightened Incorporated, which is a very near neighbor of We Act Radio now. There was a new office building put up on the corner of Good Hope Road and Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue. And that is one of the locations of Enlightened Incorporated, which is a information technology and cybersecurity company that is trying to employ local people, and has this new headquarters building on the corner of Good Hope Road and MLK. So as I said, I did ask those individuals and the committee if they wanted to say anything, and I did not hear back. I will also just share one more set of background information that is not necessarily about our current election cycle, but I did mention at the very top of the hour that November 2nd is the anniversary of an Election Day massacre that took place in, I think it's Ocoee, Florida. Happened on November 2nd, 1920, and was violence against African Americans who were killed by members of the Klan and I think other other people in the neighborhood who objected to Black people trying to vote in 1920 on November 2nd. And the Zinn Education Project has some information that will be shared at weactradio.com as well. And it is not a cheerful anniversary, but it is a piece of our history that I think we don't pay enough attention to sometimes. And I want to make sure that that is a part of our consciousness as we go forward in the election season. And finally, before I close out, and I know this is a lot of me talking, which is not my usual so much. Before we close out, I do want to add another kind of an explanation about, or a piece of background that is probably important to have. And that is that although we are not near neighbors and I don't see her very often, Elissa Silverman and I do belong to the same Jewish congregation that meets on Capitol Hill in a church near the Supreme Court. And I just feel that that's background information that, in the interest of transparency, that people should have. And we don't have time or resources, given that this was a very late organized program. We had originally planned something else for this date. We don't have time to do the topic justice, but I do hope that in our future conversations toward repair, that we will be talking about many of the divisions that do show up during election cycles, as well as over individual pieces of legislation, individual commercial and residential developments. Every decision that's made in the District of Columbia ends up being in some way a reflection of, and sometimes a battle between, different neighborhoods in the city, different classes in the city, between, unfortunately, sometimes between Jews and non-Jews, and between the overlapping Black and Jewish communities. And this is one of the things that I hope that conversations toward repair will be addressing as we go forward. And again, as I said at the top of the hour, this is a relatively new series. We have had Peace for DC, the DC Peace Academy as our very first guest. We had the Black Alliance for Peace talking about the International Month of Action Against AFRICOM for our second guest. And although October is over, it's never too late to learn about that. And you can find that at weactradio.com. And in addition, we had Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu for a very interesting conversation, and Dr. Natalie Hopkinson. So in our several episodes, we've had quite a bit of different conversations that, as I said, I hope will help us recognize some of the violence that we don't always see or name, and learn how to see it, talk about it, and find ways to work together to build peace. And so until next time, this is Virginia Avniel Spatz for We Act Radio, telling you to visit our website so that you can learn more about what was discussed today, and make sure that wherever it is that you live, you get out and vote if you haven't already done so. Peace. Until next time.